Hey, survivors, ZedFiles here. Here we have the Ferox. Coming from the recent Ark Genesis DLC, this 4-armed fluffball can go from being a stylish shoulder mount to shapeshifting into a massive, rideable werewolf. When in this form, the Ferox rivals the travelling capabilities of the Thylacoleo and the combat power of not only the normal Rex, but even the Volcanic X-Rex. Is the Ferox so powerful that the Rex has become completely useless? Has the Ferox become the new go-to combat mount? Well, in this video, I'm going to be doing an in-depth comparison on these two creatures and finding the answers to those questions in another episode of Ark Creature Comparison. I'll be comparing the creatures through shelf tests and 3 battles, which are sorted into 6 different categories: resistance, attacks, mobility, utility, perks, and lastly the battles. So first I'll be comparing them in the resistance category, and the first test is health. At level 1 base team stats, the X-Rex has 1067 health, while the normal Rex has 1100. The differences between the Tamed X-Rex and the normal Rex, besides the different skin, is that the X-Rex has 3% less health and 5% more base melee damage. The 66% damage reduction that it gets in the wild only stays in the wild, so Tamed X-Rexes will receive normal amounts of damage. The damage reduction is only meant to make surviving in Genesis more difficult. Now going back to health, the Ferox, when untransformed, the little Ferox, at level 1 base team stats, only has 55 health, which is similar to a Dodo's health. When transformed, the Ferox has 1100 health, 3% more than the X-Rex and the same amount as the normal Rex. And like the X-Rex, the Ferox also has a damage reduction, and the Ferox actually keeps it once it's tamed. When the Ferox's addiction bar is at 5%, the Ferox will have a resistance of plus 1.2%, and when its addiction bar is at 100%, the Ferox will have a resistance of plus 25%. I'll give you more information on the Ferox's element addiction bar later in the abilities test. At level 297 max team stats, with both creatures having 29 wild points and 25 tame points pumped into health, the X-Rex has 28,000, the Ferox has 28.9 thousand, which is again 3% more, along with the resistance. So the Ferox has a little bit more health than the X-Rex, and the exact same amount as the normal Rex, and with its damage resistance, it's able to take more damage than both of the Rexes. The Ferox wins the health test. The second test in the resistance category is the saddles test. The Rex has 2 different saddles that are both able to provide it armor. Its regular saddle, which is learnt at level 74, and its tech saddle, that is able to shoot high damage per second plasma blasts. And it's a tech gram. The Ferox doesn't have any saddles, but instead is able to wear helmets, all types of helmets, so the Ferox can armor up much more easily and doesn't need a saddle to be ridden, so it can be ridden at any level. Helmets also allow you to dress up both the little and transformed Feroxes. If you can find an Ascendant Metal or Riot helmet, it will provide more armor for the Ferox than an Ascendant Rex saddle will provide for the X-Rex. But the helmets do have limited durability, so they'll need to be repaired or replaced every now and then. The Rex's saddles have unlimited durability and do not have this problem. The saddles test is a draw, because while the Ferox has a wide range of helmets, can armor up more easily, can be ridden at any level, can dress up and get more armor points, the Rex is able to shoot high damage per second plasma blasts with its tech saddle, and both of its saddles have unlimited durability. The Ferox wins the resistance category with the 1 win. The next category, that also doubles as a test, is the attacks category. Useless attacks will earn 0 points, okay attacks 1 point, good attacks 2 points, great attacks 3 points, amazing attacks 4 points, and legendary attacks 5 points. So first I'll be comparing their attacks at the level 1 base team stats. First up, the X-Rex. The X-Rex's first attack is its bite. To a Kano, it does 113 damage, and to a Parasaur, it does 131 damage. After a lot of testing, with both the X-Rex and the normal Rex, I found that the Rex does 15% more damage to all herbivores. I then did some research and found that this passive damage increase was added in patch 303.1, if any of you were wondering. The Rex can bite 1.2 times every second. This means its DPS, damage per second, is 135.6 towards carnivores and 157.2 to herbivores. The bite has an okay area of effect, and this attack uses 5 stamina. This is an amazing attack and earns 4 points. The X-Rex's second attack is its roar. It causes small creatures and players that are lower level than it to poop and get stunned. The Rex can roar every 10 seconds, but victims of the roar's poop stun will have a cooldown longer than 10 seconds. The roar uses 5 stamina. This is an okay attack and earns 1 point. The X-Rex's third attack is its Texedos Plasma Blast. A direct hit to a carnivore will do 435 damage, and a direct hit to a herbivore will do 261 damage, so it does 66% less damage to herbivores, which is opposite to its bite attack. Its bite attack does 15% more damage to herbivores, while this attack does 66% less. The blasts also do splash damage. This damage can go from 11 all the way up to 255. The plasma blasts can be shot 2.5 times every second. This means its DPS on direct hits for carnivores is 1087 and for herbivores is 626. But it's very unlikely that you'll be able to land all of your shots directly on your target, so that DPS will be around half or even lower than that. Along with the splash effect, the blasts also do knockback to small and medium creatures. This is actually a bad thing because it makes it harder to land all of your shots directly on your target. The plasma blast can damage all the way up to metal structures. The range on this attack is 50 foundations, but it is hard to shoot enemies while on the move, and blast can't be aimed very high up. This attack doesn't use stamina, but instead uses one element every 25 blasts. None of the damage on this attack can be increased by leveling up melee damage. This is a legendary attack and earns 5 points. The X-Rex, when unmounted, will use its roar and then its bite. Its plasma blast won't be used. Its roar is pretty much always a waste of time that gives its enemies extra time to attack. Its bite when unmounted does the same damage, but its attack speed is slower, at 0.8 times every second instead of 1.2 times, which means its DPS becomes 90.4 to carnivores, 104.8 to herbivores. Since the X-Rex uses its bite and roar, it'll use the same effects as well, and unmounted creatures, including the X-Rex, don't use up any stamina. These unmounted combat capabilities are great and earn 3 points. Now for the Ferox's attacks. I'll be covering the Ferox's attacks at both 5% and 100% addiction, because at 5% the Ferox will get a 5% melee damage boost, at 100% it will get a 200% melee damage boost. At 100% addiction, the Ferox will also attack faster, but only with its first attack, so it doesn't affect its damage per second. I'll give you more information on this later on in the abilities test. All you need to know for now is the Ferox's average attack speed stays the same, both at 5% and 100% addiction. The Ferox's first attack is its swipe. At 5% addiction, it does 84 damage and can attack once per second, so its DPS is 84. At 100% addiction, it does 161 damage and still attacks once per second, so its DPS is 161. This attack uses 5 stamina. This is a great attack and earns 3 points. It does do slightly more damage than the Rex's bite attack, but its area effect is worse, so it isn't an amazing attack. The Ferox's second attack is its bite, which is its first attack while walking. At 5% addiction, it does 84 damage and can attack 1.15 times every second, so its DPS is 96.6. At 100% addiction, it does 161 damage, so its DPS is 185.2. This attack uses 5 stamina. Since this attack is just a slightly more powerful version of the swipe attack, I'll take away the points from the swipe attack and give it to this attack. I'll also classify it as an amazing attack because it does do more damage, so it'll get 1 more point. It's still only on par with the Rex's bite, because while the damage is a lot better, its area effect is still a lot worse. The Ferox's third attack is its claw, which is its first attack while sprinting. At 5% addiction, it does 84 damage and attacks 0.6 times every second, so its DPS is 50.4. At 100% addiction, it does 161 damage, so its DPS is 96.6. Before the Ferox claws with its top 2 arms, it throws small and some medium creatures up in the air with its bottom 2 arms. This is extremely helpful for preventing the enemy from attacking you back. The throwing area effect is pretty big, but the claw damage area effect is pretty small, so you'll often miss doing actual damage to your target. This attack is horrible for doing damage, and okay at getting around enemies. It's only okay because the Ferox already has enough mobility to easily get around any enemy it wants. This attack uses 5 stamina, but then there's also the stamina used while the Ferox is sprinting. In terms of damage for this attack, it's just a much weaker version of its previous 2 attacks, but the throw effect is special, so I'll give that aspect of this attack a point. The Ferox's 4th attack is its Slam. At 5% addiction, it does 57 damage, and attacks 0.5 times every second, so its DPS is 28.5. At 100% addiction, it does 112 damage, so its DPS is 56. This attack has a decent area effect, slows enemies, and knocks riders off their mounts, but unfortunately, it can't be used while moving. This attack uses 5 stamina. This is a great attack and earns 3 points. The Ferox's 5th attack is its Rock Throw. At 5% addiction, it does 175 damage and can be used every 5 seconds, so its DPS is 35. At 100% addiction, it still does 175 damage, so its DPS is the same. This attack has a lot of range, a range of 60 foundations, so it's good to use at the start of a fight when you have some distance away from your target. The rocks can bounce off surfaces and creatures, and they also do knockback. The rocks can also damage up to stone structures, making the Ferox a pretty good mid-level raid creature. This attack uses 75 stamina. This is a great attack and earns 3 points. The Ferox's 6th attack is its Punch, which is used when the Ferox is hanging onto a vertical surface. At 5% addiction, it does 57 damage and can attack every second, so its DPS is just 57. At 100% addiction, it does 112 damage, so its DPS is 112. This attack uses 5 stamina. It's basically a weaker version of the Swipe attack, so I won't give it a rating. The Ferox's 7th attack is its Scratch, which is also used when the Ferox is hanging onto a vertical surface. I'm pretty sure it damages structures, because it doesn't damage any creatures. Let me know in the comments if you have tested this in PvP. But since the Rock Throw can also be used while hanging, and it does much more damage than the Scratch is pretty much useless, and earns 0 points. The Ferox when unmounted will use its Swipe and Slam attacks, and on the rare occasion, its Bite and Claw attacks as well. Most of the time it will start with a Slam, use 2 swipes, or the Bite or Claw, use 1 slam, 2 swipes, 1 slam, 2 swipes, 1 slam, and so on. In 15 seconds, the unmounted Ferox does 6 swipes and 4 slams. At 5% addiction, that's 732 total damage, and so the damage per second is 48.8. At 100% addiction, that's 1414 damage, total damage, and so the damage per second is 94. A tiny bit more than the Rex's unmounted DPS to carnivores, but not as much as the Rex's unmounted DPS to herbivores. The effects used by the unmounted Ferox are the same used from the Slam attack. The Ferox's unmounted combat capabilities are a little worse than the X-Rex's, and earns 2 points. Because, besides damage, the Rex has a larger area of effect, and it would be too difficult to feed each of the unmounted Ferox's element mid-fight. If they ran out of transformation time due to not getting fed element, they would revert to their little fluffball form and die almost instantly. The little Ferox also has 0 combat capabilities. Now going back to the creature's main attacks, the bite attacks. At level 1 base team stats, the Rex's bite's average DPS, halfway between the carnivore and herbivore DPS, is 146. And since you can easily get the Ferox's addiction to 100%, I use its DPS when at 100% addiction instead of an average. So that's a DPS of 185. This is 1.27 times more damage than the Rex's bite. At level 297, max team stats, with both creatures having 32 wild points and 30 team points pumped into damage, the Rex, to carnivores, does 571 damage, which means its DPS is now 685. And to herbivores, the Rex does 657 damage, which means its DPS is now 788. And the Ferox at 5% addiction does 580 damage, which means its DPS is now 667. And at 100% addiction, the Ferox does 1068 damage, which means its DPS is now 1228. The X-Rex's Bite's average DPS is 737, and the Ferox's Bite's DPS at 100% addiction is 1228. This is 1.66 times more than the X-Rex's, so the Ferox does a bit more damage than the X-Rex at lower levels, and does a lot more damage at higher levels. Both of the creatures have a total of 13 points. The X-Rex is more suited to unmounted combat, mainly due to not untransforming mid-battle, and the Ferox is the more powerful combat mount, having a DPS of 1.66 times more damage at high levels, and with a larger amount of useful attacks. The attacks test is a draw. The next category is mobility, and the first two tests that I'll be doing at the same time are stamina and speed. The X-Rex has 420 stamina and can run 41 foundations in 11 seconds before running out, which means its speed is 37 foundations per 10 seconds. The Ferox has 1000 stamina and can run 876 foundations in 144 seconds before running out, so it can run for 13 times more seconds than the Rex. Its speed is 61 foundations per 10 seconds. This is 1.65 times faster than the Rex. The Ferox also has the ability to jump, the best jump in all of Ark. The jumps can build a massive amount of momentum in just a few seconds. The Ferox, while jumping, can travel for eternity. Each jump uses 5 stamina. The Ferox is able to regain that stamina when mid-air, so the Ferox can travel for infinite more seconds than the Rex. The speed of this traveling method is 165 foundations per 10 seconds. This is 4.5 times faster than the Rex's speed, and is faster than almost any other creature in Ark. But if you jump into obstacles and lose your momentum, then the speed will be decreased by a ton. The Ferox can also climb up vertical surfaces by jumping up higher and higher. It can climb 300 walls in 60 seconds before running out of stamina, so its average climbing speed is 50 walls per 10 seconds. I'll give you more information on the Ferox's climbing mechanics later in the abilities test. The stamina and speed tests were done at level 1 base team stats, but the Ferox's movement speed can't be leveled up, so at high levels, the Ferox still won't be able to get faster than 165 foundations per 10 seconds. The little Ferox can have levels pumped into movement speed, but those levels will disappear when the Ferox transforms. The Rex's movement speed can be leveled up, but no matter how many levels you pump into it, you still won't be able to beat the Ferox's insane speeds. Oh, and the Ferox's speed at level 1 is 20 foundations per 10 seconds. The Ferox easily wins both the stamina and speed tests. The next test is turning. The X-Rex's walking turning radius is meh, and its sprinting turning radius is bad. The Ferox's walking turning radius is perfect, it can turn on the spot. Its sprinting turning radius is also perfect, it is still able to turn on the spot. The Ferox wins the turning test. The fourth and final test in mobility is swimming. At level 1 base team stats, the X-Rex and the Ferox both have 150 oxygen and can swim 18 foundations per 10 seconds. But the Ferox can jump when on the surface of the water. Its jumps in the water can't build momentum, but they're still much faster than just swimming normally. Its speed is 61 foundations per 10 seconds, the same as its land sprinting speed. This travel speed is 3.4 times faster than its and the Rex's usual swim speeds. The Rex when in the water can't use its roar, but can still use its bite and also its plasma blasts. The Ferox when underwater can't jump, so it'll swim at 18 foundations per 10 seconds, and the only attack it can use when swimming is its bite. The X-Rex has access to more attacks when in the water, while the Ferox has a much faster travel speed, but only when on the surface. This test is closer than the other mobility tests. but the Ferox still wins since that speed is much more important than some plasma blasts. The Ferox wins the mobility category with 4 tests won. The next category is utility, and the first test is weight. At level 1 base same stats, the X-Rex has 500 weight and the Ferox has 350, 150 less than the Rex, which is 45% less. At level 297 max same stats, with both creatures having 38 wild points and 15 tame points pumped into weight, the X-Rex has 1400 and the Ferox has 930, 470 less than the Rex, which is again 45% less. The little Ferox has even less weight than it does health, so it barely even has 100 weight, even at high levels. The X-Rex wins the weight test, its first win. The next test is harvesting. Both of the creatures are carnivores, so they both harvest dead corpses. For most materials they gather the same amounts, except for keratin and chitin, which the Ferox harvests more of. The little Ferox is also able to harvest element dust from the ground, any type of ground, even the Arctic snow and the beach's sand. Every now and then, when you throw the little Ferox off your shoulder, it will scratch the ground and dig up some element dust, which is then directly deposited into your inventory. It doesn't gather up that much per dig, but over time you'll notice hundreds of random element dust piled up inside your inventory. The Ferox wins the harvesting test. The utility category is a draw, with 1 win per creature. The next category is perks, and the first test is abilities. The points in this test work the same as they did in the attacks test. The X-Rex's first ability is its trample. When the X-Rex sprints over small and some medium creatures, it will do a small amount of damage, 60 damage per trample to carnivores, and 69 damage per trample to herbivores. This is an okay ability and earns 1 point. The X-Rex's second ability is its herbivore damage boost, but also damage reduction. It does 15% more damage to herbivores with its bite attack and trample ability, and does 66% less damage to herbivores with its Texada's plasma blast attack. The damage boost and damage reduction cancel each other out, so the Rex's herbivore damage is an ability and an inability, and earns 0 points. The X-Rex's third ability is that, unlike the Ferox, it's sturdy and isn't knocked back as easily. This can be really helpful, especially in unmounted combat. This is a good ability and earns 2 points. The X-Rex's fourth and final ability is its larger field of view, which can help with spotting enemies and just being able to see more in general. This is a good ability and earns 2 points. The Ferox's first ability is actually an inability, and it's that it needs to be fed element in order to shapeshift. Little Ferox is a fragile, useless piece of drug-addicted fluff that will quickly die if attacked. And if you have element in your hotbar, it will chase you around endlessly, ignoring all of your whistles, begging you to pass the booth. It's more than happy to chase you into dangerous areas and commit Sudoku without you even knowing. The only good things about it when it's little is that it's kind of cute, digs up a tiny bit of element dust, and can be put on your shoulder, which can help with transporting it around, but most of the time you'd want to be riding it when transporting it around, since it's so fast. When it's on your shoulder, it also gives you an insulation buff, which helps you fight against hot and cold temperatures, but it also gives you this buff when you're riding it, so it's not exclusive to the little Ferox. It needing element to transform makes things even worse. Element itself isn't too hard to get in Arc Genesis, you can purchase plenty from HLNA's shop, but before long you'll have used up hundreds, even thousands of element. It's also very annoying having to keep element in your hotbar and having to remember to manually feed your Ferox every 8 minutes. It would be better if the Ferox was just always in its werewolf state. This is a terrible inability and earns -3 points. This is the first time ever in the creature comparison series that I've given a creature an inability that actually takes away points. The Ferox's second ability, which I mentioned in the shapeshift inability, is the insulation buff that it'll give you when it's riding on your shoulder, and when you're riding on its shoulders. This is a good ability and earns 2 points. The Ferox's third ability is its element addiction. Every time you feed the Ferox element, its addiction bar will go up by 5%. When it's at 5%, the Ferox will get a 5% melee damage boost, a 0.1% increase to its attack startup time, and will receive 1.2% less damage from incoming attacks. The Arc developers refer to the attack startup time as attack speed, but that's really misleading, because it only affects the very first attack in a frenzy of attacks, as shown in the attacks test. This doesn't affect the DPS of the Ferox, it only makes its first attack look cooler. You don't have to wait for the Ferox to be little in order to feed an element. You can keep feeding it as much as you like whenever. You can even feed it while you're riding it. Doing this will reset its transformation lifetime, so if your Ferox's transformation time is almost over, just feed it another element. When the addiction bar is up to 100%, the Ferox will get a plus 200% melee damage boost, a 50% increase to its attack startup time, and receive 25% less damage from incoming attacks. The addiction bar between 5 and 100% will have somewhere between these values for each buff. Unfortunately, having a high addiction also comes with some negative drawbacks. The first drawback is less transformation time. When it's at 5%, the Ferox will have 4 seconds less to be in its transformed state, so at 11 minutes 56 seconds instead of 12 minutes. And when its addiction is at 100%, the Ferox will have 3 minutes less time, so 9 minutes instead of 12. The second drawback is that it will need to consume more elements in order to transform. When the addiction bar is at 5%, it will only need 1 element, and when it's at 100%, it will need 5 elements. The third and final drawback, which doesn't really matter that much, is the Ferox becomes very jittery. These high addiction drawbacks definitely don't outweigh the high addiction buffs, so the more addicted your Ferox is, the better. But the addiction bar does go down slowly over time, so it'll cost you quite a lot of element to keep your Ferox's addiction high. The Ferox's element addiction ability is amazing and earns 4 points. The Ferox's fourth ability is being able to jump. Its jumps can build tons of momentum in just a few seconds, and once they've built up the momentum, they allow the Ferox to travel at insane speeds, surpassing almost all other creatures in Arc. These jumps also allow the Ferox to travel without running out of stamina, so the Ferox can travel for eternity. This is a legendary ability and earns 5 points. The Ferox's fifth ability is being able to climb up any vertical surface, as long as it's not at an angle greater than 90 degrees, by jumping up higher and higher. As mentioned in the stamina speed tests, the Ferox can climb 300 ceilings in 60 seconds before running out of stamina, so its average climbing speed is 50 ceilings per 10 seconds. It can also do a lot of very useful things while climbing. As well as jumping up, it can also jump down and side to side. It can stay in place on the surface it's hanging onto. When staying in place, the Ferox can use its punch, scratch, and rock throw attacks. The Ferox's climbing ability is a legendary ability and earns 5 points. The Ferox's sixth ability is that it's immune to taking fall damage. This is a great ability and earns 3 points. The Ferox's seventh and final ability is being much smaller than the Rex. This makes it harder to hit target, which is very helpful for PvP. This is a good ability and earns 2 points. The X-Rex's abilities mainly come from its larger size, and the Ferox's abilities mainly come from its hunger for element and legendary traveling capabilities. The Ferox wins the abilities test with 18 points, 13 more than the X-Rex. The next test is bonuses. Both of the creatures are rideable, but the Ferox doesn't need a saddle to be ridden, so the Ferox earns this bonus. The X-Rex doesn't allow rider weaponry, but the Ferox does. Both of them can be mate boosted. Both of them are breedable. The Feroxes need to be in their little form, as well as the female Ferox needing to be at above 90% addiction. The X-Rex lays eggs, but the Ferox doesn't. The Rex has a feces size of large, while the Ferox only has a feces size of small. The Rex earns this bonus. The Rex and the Ferox can both damage up to wood structures with their normal attacks, and the Rex with its Take Saddle's Plasma Blasts can damage up to metal, and the Ferox with its Rock Throw can damage up to stone. The Rex earns this bonus and wins this test with 5 bonuses, 1 more bonus than the Ferox. The final test before we get into the battles is the taming test. There will be 8 factors to help decide which creature is the winner of this test. The creature that wins is the creature that is easier to tame. The first factor is the habitat factor. The X-Rex is an uncommon spawn in the volcanic biome, and the Ferox is a rare spawn in the Arctic biome. And there are two different ways that you can come across one. The first way is to go looking for one in the massive snowstorm east of the Arctic's main mountain. If you're lucky enough, you'll manage to find one after around 20 minutes of searching. The second way is to enter the cave system at the coordinates 70.5 latitude and 26 longitude. This cave system contains tons of Feroxes, but also quite a lot of polar bears, so make sure you bring something to take care of those. I recommend a pump shotgun or a pack of direwolves. Even inside the cave, there isn't always that many Feroxes, especially when on public servers, so the X-Rex is easier to find than the Ferox. But the volcanic biome is much more dangerous than the Arctic biome, with deadlier environmental threats, but mainly more powerful, aggressive creatures. So the habitat factor is a draw. The second taming factor is behavior. The X-Rex is highly aggressive, but luckily will give you a warning roll before coming to attack you. The Ferox, when it's in its little form, is passive and will ignore you, unless you have element in your hotbar, then it will follow you around begging you for some. When you feed the Ferox that element, by tapping the slot that the element is in a couple of times, it will shapeshift into its werewolf state and become highly aggressive. Even more aggressive than the X-Rex. The X-Rex won't attack some creatures like other X's, but the transformed Ferox will attack and consume even fellow Feroxes without hesitation. To avoid getting killed while the Ferox is going on its drug-fueled rampages, quickly shoot the roof with a grappling hook, reel yourself up, and wait for its transformation to end. The behavior factor is a draw, because while you can get close to the Ferox when it's untransformed, it later becoming so aggressive that it cannibalizes other Feroxes can be a big problem when you're trying to tame multiple Feroxes at once. The third taming factor is the taming method factor. The X-Rex is a standard knockout tame, just get it into a pre-made or natural trap, and start pumping chunks into it. The Ferox is a unique passive tame, feeding the Ferox element or taming a bit each time, but you can't just sit back and relax between feedings, like with other passive tames. Instead, you need to make sure that you don't get killed while the Ferox goes on its rampage. I'd say these two taming methods are pretty equal in the level of difficulty, so this factor is a draw. The fourth taming factor is the torpor factor. The X-Rex at level 1 base wild stats has 1550 torpor, and also has a 66% damage reduction. All X-Creatures in the wild have a 66% damage reduction, which is lost once tamed. This damage reduction also reduces the strength of torpor infliction by 66%. So instead of taking 1550 torpor worth of chunk darts before getting knocked out, it will take 4650 torpor worth of chunk darts, 3 times the amount of chunk darts. And this is just at level 1. Since the Ferox is a passive tame, you don't need to worry about torpor and chunk darts, but you instead need to worry about grappling hooks. Every time the Ferox shapeshifts, you'll need to use a grappling hook to shoot the roof and reel yourself up away from the Ferox. So you'll need around 25 grappling hooks, which isn't as bad as the hundreds of chunk darts needed for the X-Rex. So the Ferox wins the torpor factor, having less ammo needed than the X-Rex tame. The fifth taming factor is speed, and as we saw from the speed test before, the transformed Ferox is much faster than the X-Rex, which makes it a lot harder to keep at a safe distance. But if you're using the cave taming method, you can just grapple up to get out of the Ferox's reach, so its movement speed doesn't matter. I'm going to classify this factor as a draw, since you can easily outrun the X-Rex and can also easily grapple away from the Ferox. The sixth taming factor is the carryable factor. The X-Rex can't be picked up by any flies besides the tech skiff, and the little Ferox can be carried by pteranodons and above, and the werewolf Ferox can be picked up by quetzals and above. But if the Ferox shifts forms while you're carrying it, it'll be dropped. The Ferox wins this factor by being able to be carried more easily. The seventh taming factor is the immobilized factor. Both the X-Rex and the transformed Ferox can be immobilized by large bear traps. You wouldn't really have any reason for immobilizing the small Ferox. This factor is a draw. The 8th and final taming factor is the diet factor. The X-Rex eats meat, and its favourite foods are raw mutton and exceptional kibble. And the Ferox only eats element, which can easily be bought from H&E shop. The X-Rex's standard food is a lot easier to get than the Ferox's, but the Ferox's food is also a lot easier to get than the Rex's favourite foods, so this factor is a draw. The Ferox wins the taming test with 2 factors won, all the other factors were draws. Even with 2 factors won, the Ferox and the X-Rex are still super similar with their taming difficulties. The Ferox wins the perks category. The next and final category is the battles category. This will show the creature's unmounted combat capabilities. There will be 3 battles: the 1v1 battle with the Ferox at 5% addiction, the 1v1 battle with the Ferox at 100% addiction, and then the armored 25 armor points per creature, and mate boosted 4v4 battle with the Feroxes at 50% addiction. And for all of the battles, the creatures will be at their level 1 base team stats. Now that all of the tests, battles, and categories are over, it's time for the summary. The Ferox won the health, stamina, speed, turning, swimming, harvesting, abilities, and taming tests, so 8 tests, and won the 100% addiction 1v1, and armored and mate boosted 50% addiction 4v4 battles. The X-Rex won the weight and bonuses tests, so 2 tests, and the 5% addiction 1v1 battle. The other 2 tests, saddles and attacks, were draws. As long as you have a lot of element, the Ferox is a terrifyingly powerful combat mount, with tons of health, even more resistance, and an amazing arsenal of attacks, including the swipe, bite, slam, and rock throw. It's an even more powerful combat mount than the X-Rex. The Ferox is also one of the best travel mounts in all of Ark, far better than the Thylacoleo and Pteranodon. It can travel at crazy speeds of 165 foundations per 10 seconds, and without losing any stamina. It can also climb up vertical surfaces with ease, not take any fall damage, and hang on to enemy bases while lobbing rocks around. The Ferox is your best go-to mount for Genesis, a Genesis survivor's best friend. The X-Rex remains the better combat creature for unmounted combat, mainly due to not having limited transformation time like the Ferox does, but also due to having a more consistent area of effect attack, being sturdier, and being able to be bred more easily, thanks to laying eggs. The X-Rex's Tech Saddle's Plasma Blast is also very powerful, but it needs a rider in order to be used, and in Genesis, that rider would be better utilized if mounted in a tech turret on the Space Whale. Besides, the Ferox allows rider reparee, so you can use your rifle while riding on your far more agile 4-armed werewolf. The Ferox has definitely dethroned the Rex of being the go-to combat mount, and has also managed to dethrone the Thylacoleo of being the go-to travel mount. But the Rex manages to remain the better unmounted combat creature, and as for the Thylacoleo, well, I'll discuss that in the next episode of Creature Comparison. So, we have now reached the end of this video. If you enjoyed or found it helpful, don't forget to give it a like, and also make sure to be subscribed to the channel so that you don't miss any future Genesis Creature Comparison videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.